The Pixel 5 has crept up on us this year, mainly because Google haven't actually leaked the product themselves to us, which they usually do. But with that said, we know pretty much everything about this phone. Here are the top 10 features, some upgrades, a couple of downgrades as well. But I think overall, Google have made all the right decisions with this phone. Number one is Soli and Motion Sense. And this was something that came with last year's models. Google really went all out with this one in terms of putting it in the phone. So Soli and Motion Sense that is enabled by Soli basically is a way for you to wave your hand around in front of the phone and try to change some of the settings within the phone. This really was used mainly for swiping away notifications, trying to turn up the volume of audio that you're listening to. So yeah, a massive, ugly top notch, a huge bezel, loads of expense with all of these sensors, and all you could do was swipe away notifications. Well, they have taken all of that away into the Pixel 5, so that is all gone. So Soli is gone, all of those extra sensors up there are gone, and comes a new design, new modern design, just looks like most other smartphones, or at least getting rid of the notch, and that's basically the new design. As you can see, no big bezels really this time around. You just get the cutout top left-hand corner. We know that the Google Pixel 5 should be coming with around about a 5.8 inch sized screen. So in terms of modern designs, this is fairly small. Most Android phones coming in around 6.5 inches right now, 6.4 inches, maybe 6.7 inches, 5.8 definitely on the smaller side. Then in at number 3, the Snapdragon 765G. This is the chipset that they're using in the Pixel 5. And it's big news because there's no flagship SoC in the Pixel 5. Everything, all of the leaks are pointing towards a Snapdragon 765G, which is a mid-range chipset in the Pixel 5, which, well, usually is a flagship phone, but not this year. All of the other elements in the Pixel 5 really are similar or upgraded overall over the Pixel 4 and 4 XL, but this chipset is, well, you can't say it's a downgrade because it's a modern chipset, but it's just not a flagship SoC. What is going to lack with this chipset compared to the Snapdragon 865, which is the flagship, or even the 865 Plus? Well, at the top end, yeah, you're not going to get that power. So if you really are into gaming, that's really going to be the area where you're going to see some differences. Depending on which game you're playing, those real high-end settings, the highest refresh rates, really are supported by the 865, the flagship, and not the 765G. There is also an argument to be said that actually with this chipset, the image processing isn't going to be as good because, well, a lot of smartphone imagery is down to the chipset. The 865 has the best processing, also the best ISPs, the image signal processors, to get the best results in terms of dynamic range and colors and many other things when it comes to photography and smartphones. So having a mid-range chipset, it's going to be really interesting to see if Google can keep the absolute best image quality with a mid-range phone as opposed to other phones that are using that flagship SoC. In at number 4, 8 gigabytes of RAM. This was found by Android Authority, so up from 6 gigabytes. That's a good and very decent amount of RAM. It's an Android phone, but stock Google. Certainly it's more than the iPhone in terms of RAM, but it doesn't really matter these days. It's nice to see a bump up in the RAM to 8 gigabytes. If you're going for a Samsung phone, some OnePlus phones, any phone from a Chinese brand, you're going to get in a flagship models, 8 gigabytes as a base really, anywhere up to 12 gigabytes. 8 gigabytes is enough though for most people and most phones, and it's solid that they are upgrading it because in 2020 maybe 6 gigabytes, maybe you can say if you have the phone for a few years, you might start to have some problems towards the end, but 8 gigabytes, definitely a good upgrade this time. In at number 5, and yeah, it's a Google, we have to talk about the cameras. So apparently the 2x zoom camera is going, and that's being switched out to an ultra-wide camera. So there's a lot of leaks saying that this is what's happening, and if Google do it, I think it's the right choice. Most consumers do prefer an ultra-wide over a zoom if they've just got 2 lenses. Google have made a big thing about the zoom camera on their phones, and they have super zoom and lots of different functions with that zoom camera. So it'll be interesting to see if Google switch out for that ultra wide, but certainly having an ultra wide makes a big difference over maybe the 4 and 4 XL. It will be the first time that Google will use an ultra wide. Most consumers like it. So this is another decision that I think is a good thing if Google do it. Taking away the notch and also having an ultra wide camera These are just two things that consumers do want when they're looking for a smartphone. Also, according to leaks, the main image sensor on there is going to be a 12.2 megapixel sensor. That is exactly the same one as we've seen for the last few years. So this is the Sony IMX363, exactly the same sensor as we've seen in the 4XL, even the 3XL. So it's going to be exactly the same sensor. And that means really that we're just looking for Google to improve things again with their software. Then we come to the battery, which is a really big problem with the Pixel 4 series. A lot of anecdotal reports, reviewers, people saying that the battery life just wasn't really good enough. The battery was too small, it didn't last long enough. That looks to have been rectified this time. So a bigger battery was confirmed by a few leaks. And then according to some other specs leaks, it may be around the 4,000 milliamp hour range. This isn't the biggest of batteries. A lot of other phones maybe 4,500. But with the mid-range chipset, you don't need as much power. It's not as powerful. It doesn't draw as much from the battery as the flagship SoC. So 4,000 actually should be overall a very decent battery upgrade over what we got last time. When it comes to the screen, the initial leaks that we got suggested a 120Hz OLED panel. Now we're hearing maybe 90Hz OLED panel according to some specs leaks. There's no real confirmation on this right now, but either 120 or 90Hz is a certainty. The Pixel 4 series had 90Hz. So there's really two conflicting leaks on this one. First is a leak of the device specs that show a 90Hz refresh rate on Android Authority. There's also on the other side, Ross Young, who is a supply chain consultant, saying that he has seen a new display that Google are going to be using that has 120Hz. And that display is also 6.67 inches, which is way bigger than the display on the smallest Pixel 5, which should be coming at 5.8 inches. The reason I say 5.8 inches for the Pixel 5 is because OnLeaks has shown us the device. He is one of the most reliable leakers in the industry when it comes to looking at devices, the dimensions, and all of the CAD renders. So I always side with OnLeaks in terms of accuracy when it comes to sizes, dimensions, and also the renders that we see of unreleased products. We've also seen a few actual hardware leaks as well, also leaked by some very reputable names like XDA developers that do tell us that the Pixel 5 is actually the smaller of the two. Then we have the fingerprint sensor, and this is worth mentioning because Google are one of a very few number of brands now actually keeping the fingerprint sensor on the back of the phone. Even though we know for a fact that the screen is going to be an OLED screen, and well, even mid-range budget phones that are using OLEDs now do put the fingerprint sensor under the screen. Google are not doing this for whatever reason. I'm not sure if it's because of cost cutting or whether they actually think that the back is the best place for it. But even in 2020 with their new flagship device, the Pixel 5 and the Pixel 4a 5G, keeping the fingerprint sensor on the back. And then we finish off with the Google Pixel 4a 5G. So Google have just launched the 4a, the Snapdragon 730G chipset. So that's last year's mid-range chipset. Then the Pixel 5 with this year's mid-range chipset, and the 4a 5G with the same mid-range chipset as the Pixel 5. This will apparently also be bigger than the Pixel 5. So you get a bigger screen, according to OnLeaks, about a 6.1 or 6.2 inch screen. No high refresh rates on this phone, according to those specs leaks. It will apparently though keep the headphone jack, keep the back mounted fingerprint sensor, also share the design of all the other phones in the Pixel lineup, be bigger than the Pixel 5, not have any metal though, so will just be a plastic body. So a few downgrades from the Pixel 5, not the very high end screen, and also just the design in terms of the materials, but a cheaper price and the same chipset. So you're getting probably the same camera experience overall, but those upgrades in terms of the premium screen, some of the premiums do go into the Pixel 5, but a really weird one to have the 4a 5G actually bigger than the Pixel 5 this year. Some weird decisions by Google with the lineup this year, but I think overall the Pixel 5 does look like a really interesting device. High refresh rate screen, amazing cameras, and with a mid-range chipset that most people are fine with. Maybe a lower and more competitive price, which could actually make that phone really compelling in certain markets. And I can't wait to see what those cameras can do this year. That's it for this one though. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.